Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, Sarah Carson, partner at Smith Currie and Hancock in Raleigh, North Carolina. Today's topic is how to grow your business successfully into different states. For more information on this episode and others, check out Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you'll hear from the experts about key topics to help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, a Senior Director with Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host Mike Diercksen, our Senior Consultant of Innovation and Content Solutions. Our guest today, a leader in legal issues impacting the construction industry, is Sarah Carson. Sarah's a partner with the law firm Smith Currie here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sarah, how are you today?
I am doing wonderful. I am so happy to be a part of this. I've been listening to your podcast for a while, and every single time I walk away with learning something new. So I hope I can provide the same.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. I'm sure our audience is going to find everything you have to say very insightful. I should remind everybody from a legal perspective, we have to give a little bit of a disclaimer out of the gates that the following information is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship or give rise to attorney-client privilege. Any details provided herein are an overview of considerations and should not be deemed as an exhaustive list of matters to be considered. Sarah, is there anything you want to add there before we move forward? Just want to give that general disclaimer.
Nope, you did a great job, and it actually reminds me of the saying that the trouble with the law is lawyers. But in all seriousness, it is important to make sure we're clear about expectations, make sure we're clear on the issues that I can speak to. I'm licensed in North Carolina, Georgia, and DC. So if something comes up in Alaska, I'm not the one to ask.
Fantastic, and we do encourage people to reach out afterwards for legal advice, but just want to make sure we get that clear out of the gates. Mike, how about you? Do you need any disclaimers you need to add today?
No disclaimers for me. I'm just excited to speak with Sarah and get the podcast going.
As am I. Sarah, thank you very much again for joining our show today. It's definitely a pleasure to connect with you and appreciate you reaching out. Before we dive into our main topic, I wonder if you could maybe tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, so I'm obviously a huge UK basketball fan through the good times and the bad being that last performance in last year's tournament. I went to college at Emory University in Atlanta, and then moved to Washington, D.C. for law school. I did not enter law school with the plans to become a prosecutor or a divorce attorney, but instead planned on finding a type of law that I thought I would enjoy practicing. And I'll admit that when I entered law school, and I grew up during a time where you watched LA Law. So, and LA Law certainly did not highlight construction law. So it was a whole new ball game.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, I'm a big Law and Order fan myself, but clearly that's not what we're talking about today. Sarah, how did you find construction as an area of practice? I mean, I know there's a whole wide array of very niche areas to get into, but what brought you to construction?
As a poor law student, I got a job law clerking for a rather large law firm in DC. And lucky to get the job, it had about 30 practice areas. So I had no idea which practice group I was going to be assigned to. And on my first day, I learned I was going to be assigned to the government contracts and construction law group. And I'll admit, my heart did not exactly skip a beat when I learned of this assignment. But once I started getting involved, I realized how much I enjoyed it. I loved the intricacies of construction law, how every single construction project is different. I didn't want to go into a type of practice where it felt like Groundhog Day, the movie where you're doing the same thing over and over again. So while I initially was not that excited, once I got the exposure of how much is involved in construction law, I really enjoyed it. And after graduation, I decided to move back to Atlanta because I really enjoyed it when I lived there during college, and I did not enjoy the cost of living in DC. So started to look. I had heard of Smith Currie while I was practicing in Washington, D.C. I learned it has a phenomenal reputation. It's one of the oldest construction law firms in the country, and sent in my resume with a prayer and was lucky enough to get the job. And from the beginning, I was exposed to so many different facets quickly, from drafting the contracts and dealing with issues as they arose on the project to not inevitably, hopefully not, but when disputes did arise, working through settlements and litigation and mediation, arbitration as necessary. And I also got the opportunity to teach construction law at the undergraduate and graduate level. But after several years in Atlanta and 2 boys, my husband, who's from Durham, North Carolina, we decided to move up to the Raleigh-Durham area. And at the time, Smith Currie had a Charlotte office. So I eventually started working through the Charlotte office. I'd commute as needed. And eventually Smith Currie decided that they wanted a Raleigh office. So I led that charge. And now we've got 4 attorneys that are working through the offices, and we're continuing to grow.
That's excellent, Sarah. And the old adage, you don't get what you don't ask for, right? So throw that resume out there. You never know where it's going to take you. And you've had a nice long career with Smith Currie, and all that because the law student said, why not, right? Let them say no instead of me.
Right.
So
I like that.
Well, yeah. So Sarah, we're going to focus today primarily on a developing trend that we're seeing in the marketplace, and we've talked about a little bit before the show, and how to successfully grow your business into different states. We had initially talked about a couple potential topics, but this really stuck to the top of your list. What do you think that it is about that drew you to this topic?
For as often as, unfortunately, I meet clients when things have gone wrong, I want to equip those involved in the construction industry with the good news and the tools to expand, because there is momentum towards growth. It may not feel like it often, but contractors of every size and trade, there's incredible opportunities out there. And too often I see companies wait on the sidelines to take the jump until the economy stabilizes, until there's no longer supply shortages. I could go on. Another reason is that I hear the company will say, oh, I'm busy, so there's no need to look elsewhere. But busy does not always mean profitable. So I want to help contractors, all of the subcontractors, everyone involved in the construction industry, take advantage of these opportunities, because growing your business provides new opportunities, long-term economic stability. You're no longer stuck riding the waves of instability in a single state. If your home state is saturated with companies that are doing the same type of work, it's time to make sure that there's other opportunities elsewhere where you can grow and where you can create a base of clients. And so there needs to be a way for these contractors, the subs, the trades, to learn how to look beyond the sidelines and see that there is opportunity. And it's just a matter of taking those steps to take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting timing for your message, Sarah, coming really as we're escalating out of COVID, I guess, and we're still close to a lot of the negative aspects of that. But I think one of the positives really in kind of moving construction technology forward and forcing people to think out of the box a little bit and look towards those new opportunities it really has a lot of our listeners, particularly in the GC community, looking for new solutions and questioning, well, we've always done it this way. Should we continue to do it this way, or should we look for new alternatives and new opportunities? So I guess given that and kind of that opening of the market a little bit, where do you start? How would you advise somebody in our industry who is looking to expand into new markets in different states and territories?
I think the first step is to get an overview of what are the requirements for each of the states that you are interested in expanding into. And the AGC, the ABC, as well as other trade associations have helpful resources. They have 50 state matrices that provide a summary that'll give you that snapshot of what's going to be involved. So once you're comfortable, having done your initial research, I recommend completing something I called a risk and requirement assessment, because companies can't afford to wait until a problem arises to assess the risks that are inherent in doing construction work and going into a new state. So what it usually involves is reviewing the registration requirements, looking into the state's revenue department requirements, the local licensing, special insurance, preservation of lien and bond rights, payment security, as well as the potential for labor, material, and equipment impacts. So the long list.
It is. That is a pretty, it seems like an extensive list, but I know that's not all encompassing. There's a lot more there too. Are there one or two that are perhaps most important that our audience should focus on if they were looking to make that jump?
Yes, I would focus on the items that can be the most time sensitive and costly if they're not done correctly, which would be licensing requirements and lien considerations.
Yeah, I was going to say licensing requirements jumps out at me, because you got to make sure you clear the red tape. You got to make sure everything is, you've dotted your I's, crossed your T's well in advance. So what would you say is the most important thing to know or to look into with licensing requirements when looking to expand to different states?
Well, the first step is to not assume just because you qualify for a license in your home state that's going to be just as easy to get a license in the next state. And if you make one small mistake, you can lose the opportunity for recovering funds, for your profit. So the first question is, do I need a license in the new state? About half of all states require general contractors to obtain a license when acting as the prime for a project. But that can depend on the amount of money involved, whether it's residential, commercial, and subcontractors all have different requirements. And again, not assuming because you meet those requirements in your home state that it's going to work in the new state. And it's also it can be a very timely process. So one avenue a lot of contractors look into is taking advantage of reciprocity opportunities where you can, which in essence is you're obtaining a license without the delays associated with getting the traditional, in the traditional manner. There are many websites where you can get this information as to which states have reciprocity with others. But again, each state's different. For example, Florida requires a contractor to have been licensed for at least 10 years. But if your home state meets those requirements, you can obtain licenses in as many states as you can pay for, maintain the required paperwork. And this sounds like such a great opportunity. So many contractors look at this and think, gosh, I'm just going to expand and expand and expand because I can just jump from one reciprocity opportunity to the next. But that's a bad assumption. Just because you're licensed in another state through reciprocity does not allow you to obtain a reciprocal license in other states. Well, let me give you a better example than just me describing the fact. let's say you're an Arizona-based electrical subcontractor. Being from Arizona, you can receive a reciprocal license in Utah. But having that reciprocal license in Utah does not mean that you can get a license in Colorado, even though Utah and Colorado allow for reciprocity. And last thing in terms of licensing, and this is something that seems obvious, but is often overlooked, is making sure that that license is maintained. I know of a case, making sure all those, fees are paid. I know of a Tennessee contractor who learned it the hard way. At the time he entered the contract, fully licensed. During the time, this was a home construction project, he let the license lapse, realized it after the project was done, renewed it. During that time, he sued the homeowners for breach of contract, for not getting the remainder of the payment. And the court held that didn't matter if you were licensed when you entered the contract. As soon as that license expired, you're out of luck. And so all they were able to recover is whatever documented expenses they could prove to the court. So that licensing is very important, not only to provide new opportunities, but also in one state, but also through reciprocity to gain access to others.
I can't tell you how many times we've seen, just working on claims, one of the first things we start looking for, you go through and you're like, oh, this contractor's license is lapsed, or this subcontractor's license is lapsed. And it's a lot more frequent than I would have guessed. So to your point, it happens a lot, and something certainly to pay attention to.
And it can be lost while it seems obvious in the day-to-day, that's not usually on your top list of things to do, is to make sure that, this deadline's coming up, I've got to pay that $35 renewal fee. But it should be near the top of that checklist to make sure that you can avoid it for the problems.
Absolutely. You got to read the fine print. You got to make sure you've done all the work, because that's a completely preventable problem, right? It's just about managing the terms and make sure you're up to date. But as we know, especially when you get into a claims or a litigation type issue, having that lapse could make all the difference within your case of identifying and getting coverage or support through litigation. So another thing I want to talk about was, you mentioned the understanding of the lien requirements, because that can also be a timing issue. I think that's wildly important. Again, as we're talking about, the timing and organization is key here.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, contractors and owners don't review the lien laws in the new state until there's an immediate need to file a claim, or from the owner's perspective, after the lien has been filed. This approach can be dangerous because many states require actions that need to be taken very early. For example, in Alabama, to preserve something called a full price lien, you have to provide notice before you step foot on that project, or at least provide the work, start doing it. And if you don't take that first step of providing it, your lien rights are going to be at issue. And the time frame for filing a lien can also change between states. We know the general premise of filing liens when you last furnish work or materials seems obvious, but contractors sometimes stumble over what constitutes the last furnishing. In North Carolina, punch list or warranty work typically will not extend the time for filing a lien claim. But next door in South Carolina, that type of work may qualify to extend the time for filing a lien. And as a last point, when it comes to liens, almost right, it's not good enough. I know of a Maryland.
So they call it perfecting lien rights, right?
Exactly. I know of a Maryland contractor who learned this the hard way. Maryland requires 120 days. Contractor thinks, great, got 4 months. But 4 months does not equal 120 days. So that contractor lost his lien rights. So don't make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Actually count out those 120 days to
Right.
make sure that you are protecting all of your rights.
Right. And it's interesting. It's like we said, these are preventable issues, and making assumptions. I know we all know the phrase that goes along with that when you make assumptions, but honestly, it's one of those things that you look at, and sometimes it can work in your favor too, right? And just the assumption, or just because maybe the state that you work in primarily has stricter laws, doesn't mean that you should just take for granted it'll be easier somewhere else. There may be something that benefits you too. Maybe you didn't think you could file for that claim in South Carolina, but you can. So it's important to know that both sides, right?
Right.
Yeah. And we've certainly seen a lot of that in our side of things, Sarah. Our owner clients shift to new markets. They pull GCs with preferred pricing and long experience records with them. They pull them along with them, and emerging technologies such as BIM, prefab, more creative procurement strategies are being deployed to support these efforts. But what are some things that these firms should be looking at once they enter that new market or region?
These new approaches that you described are opening the door to increase profits. You brought up the prefabrication, which has made a huge impact on performance and productivity when the opportunity presents itself in the new state. Prefabrication and modular construction are generally constructed. These products are constructed in a warehouse and then delivered to the job site. In terms of performance, it's easier to manage construction under controlled shop conditions. As to productivity, fewer workers need to be on site, as the majority of the work can be done at the warehouse. And if you're in a warehouse, you're not going to have that impact of weather delays. And so there are some great opportunities with that innovation. However, there's also some costs that need to be considered. While it is wonderful to have these different components produced elsewhere, it still has to get to the job site, which means there are weight considerations. There is the cost involved in shipping this product to the new site. Does this product require certain tools? So there's definitely pros and cons. And as to the scenario that you brought up regarding owners looking to ship their team to a new state to often replicate what has become their signature product, I see that a lot in mixed use development, multifamily. It's not as easy as it seems. Going back to the licensing issue, one contractor, no problem, maybe easy to get that license. While for a sub, your partner in productivity may take longer. And one of the things that is so frustrating that can be looked at and examined on the front end, but unfortunately, I usually see it once a problem happens, is that this team that has created this product, created their signature work, they think that the contract that works for them in their home state gonna work in whatever state, just a matter of copy, pasting, changing out the names. And that is such a risk. You can't just replicate this blindly because you're setting yourself up for potential liability. Pay when paid and pay if paid clauses, often copied and pasted, new contracts, not a second thought. But Virginia just passed a law that beginning in 2023, it bans the use of pay if paid clauses. So not only is it banned, but now those contracts require that there has to be some type of timeline for payment. And one other clause that comes up often is the no damages for delay clause, which some states have prohibited because they view it as being unfair. They're unfairly shifting the big dollar construction risks to another party. while other states are more lenient, and they'll uphold it as long as there was no concealment, misrepresentation, or fraud involved. In other words, everyone understood what they were agreeing to. So it really depends on the state, what language you can use and what language, if you mistakenly add or continue to have in the contract that worked great in the past, can be costly.
Yeah, and absolutely true, Sarah. I mean, you're talking about probably some of the larger articles of risk transfer too between, owner GC and all of your sub and trade partners. Critical, you want to get those right and make sure they're enforceable. And I guess, when you're talking to your clients and some of the more successful GCs that you're dealing with in pursuing these new markets, it sounds like there's obviously a lot of upfront homework to be done there in terms of your project risk assessment and understanding all the legal ramifications of kind of making that shift. Is there something else beyond that you're seeing that maybe the bigger, better GCs are doing? Or I shouldn't even say bigger and better, maybe more profitable is probably what people want to know. What are the more profitable GCs that are making that shift? What are they looking to on top of just those baseline barriers to entry?
It boils down to a number of different considerations. Again, whether you're big or small, you've got to do your homework, but you have to make sure not only is the work doable, but more significantly, is it going to be profitable and can my business make it work financially? So the first step I see contractors, the ones that are having a lot of success in these new states, is to review your own company's capabilities for expansion. For each state, you need to evaluate, is there a demand for the type of work that you perform? Understand what the upfront costs are going to be and try to project how long it's going to take to cover those costs and turn a profit. And they look at the tax incentives that are available, which is often the case for alternative energy projects. And it's also important to investigate the availability and cost of new vendors as you enter these new states. Sometimes you can reach out to them, talk with them about their flexibility, their ability to possibly negotiate certain costs for new opportunities. But one of the most important aspects is embracing technology. I think back to the days of hearing the fax machine beep and here comes something, and we're so far beyond that now. Using blockchain approach helps keep information accurate, up to date, so every member of the team has access to it. BIM allows for 3D, 4D simulations to replan projects and re-optimize schedules to stay on track with budgets and time. And that's the goal of every construction project, is on time and on budget. There's also the Internet of Things, which allows a contractor to monitor wear and tear on an item. So if there's a specific, let's say an elevator, that there's a certain time frame that usually it works without any issues, this monitors and keeps on top of maybe when it's time to check it out, make sure it doesn't need repairs or replacement. But it's not worth the investment if you don't know how to use them correctly. And you need to make sure that everybody understands how it works. And that can show, with demonstrating this knowledge and this technology, you can explain to your team that it helps them. This is an incentive. And I can't stress enough the importance of getting to know others from the construction industry in your new state. Joining a trade organization is a great way to not only make connections, but also learn about some of the intricacies of the business market and some subjective interpretations. I have a client who was interested in relocating a solar farm to a new state, went to this new state's trade organization dinner, sat next to someone and found out through casual dinner that there were undercurrents about changing the chosen site's availability, the zoning. This isn't something he could have just found out by doing research in a newspaper. So you also need to make sure you can make those connections, and that those are the things that I see consistently helping these contractors, GCs of any size. Those are the steps that are making a huge difference.
Something we hear all too often on the show is communication is so important, and relationships, right? Having the right people in the right position. Maybe that means the right people in the right places. Like your example, being at, a casual diner and just learning about something that you couldn't Google, right? You had to have that local knowledge in order to do that. But really investing that time and the resources in both relationships and communication is so important for this.
Right.
Yeah, and there's so much of that can be obtained informally, whether it's, just market saturation, understanding of what other people are feeling, labor and resource availability. Another one I've heard frequently from various subcontractor associations is relationships with local code officials, how heavily scrutinized and how much time and effort they put into, say, field inspections versus plan review up front, and how forward thinking and technologically innovative they are. So there's a lot of that are things you just don't think of, on day one when you decide, hey, I think maybe we should take a look over here at this new market. And I guess on the other end of the spectrum, Sarah, are there some other challenges along those lines that maybe might slip through the initial risk assessment just because they're not front of mind, that like day one thing you're thinking about?
Right. One thing that I've learned over the years, as well as my clients, is never assume you understand the obvious. There are laws in states that on their face appear to have nothing to do with the construction industry, but they actually end up having a big impact. There is something called the Jessica Lunsford Act in Florida, which was created after a young girl was murdered by a registered sex offender, and it resulted in a better way to track registered sex offenders. Incredibly important law. How in the world does that have to do with the construction industry? First glance, you assume it wouldn't. But the law requires a criminal history check for contractors who work on school grounds in certain scenarios. This check requires the submission of fingerprints for state processing and then on to the FBI for national processing. So one way to stay on top of these hidden problems goes back to what we were talking about earlier, making friendships, having relationships in that community where they may be able to let you know of some of this insider information. Make sure that you're getting great local counsel who knows the letter of the law, and not only the letter, but kind of what an impact it might have on parts of the construction industry. And one other tip I always say is to keep abreast of any legislation that might be going on. Check your state, check your local legislature. You can do a check of certain terms, and you'll be surprised at what comes up that just is kind of a one line, almost as an aside, and can make a huge difference.
I think that's where having those connections too, and you talked about trade industry groups, like I know AGC does a great legal update, and your firm as well, but having somebody who is just in the know and paying attention to those things on your behalf is highly beneficial. Just making sure things aren't falling through the cracks, you're not missing anything.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's not even just about what's there, it's about what's gonna be there, right? Yeah, as you mentioned with Virginia, right? It's in 2023, you're gonna see that new law kick in, and that can make all the difference.
Right, and if you're not aware, you can't make those changes, and now you're stuck with that clause that's gonna get you in trouble.
Yeah, well, Sarah, this has been so great to speak with you today and to have you on the show. As I know you're a fan of the show, we always like to give our audience 3 takeaways from the show. So I would ask you, what would the 3 takeaways be for you, for an audience member listening today, contemplating maybe reaching out to a new market space?
First, don't underestimate your ability to succeed in a new market. There's tools out there. I know it can be scary to think about and not to sound Pollyanna-ish, but you can make this work. And that's sometimes very surprising and hopefully something to hang your hat on when we get so much negative information about our economy. Understand the where, why, and when to determine the best strategy to relocate your company, and actively participate in your company's growth by continuously being aware of shifts in the market, materials that a lot of times I'm seeing people buy up front, a lot of materials. Where is that available? So continue to educate yourself and not just make that first step and think, okay, I'm in this state, I'm good. You have to always be knowledgeable and always continue to make sure that you are in compliance with the law and in the best situation to find success and long-term success.
Mm-hmm. No, those are excellent takeaways. And as I know, you know, what about an action item, right? If I'm listening today and I'm feeling inspired, right, and maybe I'm in South Carolina, well, I go to North Carolina, or vice versa. You know, what would be that first step? What would be the number one first step to be successful in that?
Plan today for tomorrow. Take a step back and look not only at the big picture, but also within your company. You need to look at your current operations and how they may be able to be shifted. For example, is there a way to minimize the costs in one aspect of the business that will free up money to jumpstart these opportunities? So just to make sure that not only continuing to look at your own company, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, seeing how certain aspects can be changed will provide you with the funds to jump in these new markets, and also it'll provide you with a path for success.
Sarah, before we let you go, we always like to hit our guest with a few rapid fire questions. And given the breadth of this topic, I feel like I could talk to you for 8 hours and still come away with questions. But given that, what's something we should have asked that we didn't, that maybe you want to address?
It wasn't something necessarily you didn't ask, but you did touch on, was the importance of the people you work with. And construction is not a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday job. It is 7 days a week, long hours. And whether it's you're growing in a new market and you need to know the intricacies, some things can't be measured in dollars and cents. Yes, we can talk about the cost of retaining an employee versus replacement, but regardless, make your organization, your business, a place where people want to work. And I have given a number of in-house seminars to the entire company. So no matter your role. And so often afterwards, someone will come up to me who they view themselves as the low man on the totem pole. And they'll come up and say, wow, I can't believe I was able to be a part of this. It makes me realize that I'm valued and that I'm not just this certain person who doesn't exist. Because I always think there's no such position that begins with just a. He's just a painter, just someone who works with waste. Everyone's important, making sure that is valued, whether or not you can't expand if your company's not in a good position with happy, motivated employees.
No, very, very true. And definitely got to take care of the right people, having the right people in the right positions and valuing them, like you're saying. Sarah, a fun question we like to ask: what is something about you that our listeners may be surprised to hear about?
Well, not only do I like to think of myself as an accomplished lawyer, I was ranked 3rd in the state of Kentucky when I was 12 years old for table tennis. And before everyone asked for autographs, I should mention that only 3 people entered. So that's my claim to fame, and something that, and unfortunately, after people learn of this, they try to challenge me to a game and usually lose. So thank God there weren't 4 people.
Bronze is still pretty good.
I was gonna say, you're on the podium. You're on the podium.
Exactly. I got a medal.
That's excellent. Excellent. Well, Sarah, wrapping this up, this is the Building Bite podcast as BIM Insurance Technologies with the experts. You are today's expert, but we do like to ask our guests, what are you taking a bite out of today?
Maybe not today, but for a special occasion, there's nothing better than a 4-inch high pork chop from Perry Steakhouse. Gotta love it. Bring an empty stomach because you will be quite full.
It's not the first time we've heard that recommendation, and having seen it, I highly encourage everybody. If you haven't checked it out, go do it. And also, don't play Sarah for beer money and ping pong. Those are my 2 recommendations coming out of the day. The pork chop, very high on the list, and beware the table tennis icons. So,
yes.
Sarah, thanks for chatting with us again today. If our listeners want to hook up with you after the podcast, where can they find you?
Absolutely. On LinkedIn, I'm Sarah Carson Construction, or you can just look for Sarah Carson. Our website is Smith Currie, SMITHCURRIE.com. And my email is secarson@smithcurrie.com. And I'd love to hear from any of your listeners. If I can be of any help, I'm happy to help. And again, I'm just really appreciative that you all gave me this opportunity.
Likewise, we're really happy to have you on today, and certainly appreciate you taking the time. Thank you again, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.